All right, so we've got a really interesting deep dive ahead of us today. Looks like we're tackling emotional pain, huh? And it seems like a pretty thorough collection of sources, too. We've got articles, blog posts, even something from a counseling website.
Yeah, it seems like our listener is ready to really dig deep into this topic. And,
Yeah,
they're definitely not alone in wanting to figure out how to deal with those tough emotional times. Is something we all face.
absolutely. And, it really struck me while I was going through all this material how much emphasis there was on the fact that emotional pain, it's just as real as physical pain. I mean, they even trigger the same parts of the brain. One article even mentioned the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, I think it was.
Right, the insula, yeah. And those are both involved in processing pain, whether it's physical or emotional.
So it's not just in our heads, right? It's a real physical experience.
Exactly. And that's why ignoring it can have just as many serious consequences as ignoring a physical injury. And, a lot of these sources actually highlighted how neglecting emotional well-being can impact both your mental and physical health. So it's not something to be taken lightly.
Okay, so before we even get to coping strategies, maybe it's worth spending a little time understanding just why emotional pain hurts so much in the first place. What's going on there?
That's a great question. I mean, think about it. Our brain is basically wired with this alarm system, and when we experience emotional distress, that alarm goes off. It's a signal that something needs attention, something's not right.
Oh, interesting. So it's a warning signal then, basically. But why does it feel so much more complicated, I don't know, messy than something like a physical injury, a broken bone, or a cut?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Unlike a simple cut or a bruise, right? Emotional pain often brings in all these other factors like our thoughts, our memories, past experiences,
Okay, I can see that.
things like past trauma, needs that haven't been met, even certain fears. All of those can kind of amplify the intensity of the pain.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, I don't know if you've been burned by fire before. Even just thinking about fire can trigger this wave of anxiety, right?
Exactly. So those past experiences, they really shape how we perceive and react to emotional pain. They kind of color the whole experience.
Okay, so past experiences play a big role. And speaking of things that can trigger those alarm bells, the sources also talk about some pretty common causes of emotional pain.
Yeah, for sure. Loss, for example, is a huge one.
Hmm.
And that could take so many different forms. It could be the death of someone you love or the end of a relationship. Even losing a job can feel like a major loss for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like this huge void that's left behind, this sense of something missing. And then, of course, there's trauma, which a lot of these sources really went into detail about. It's like these deep emotional scars that can stick around long after the actual event is over.
Right? We're talking about things like abuse, accidents, violence, anything that really shatters your sense of safety and security in the world.
And even though those are the big ones, the sources also point out that it doesn't always have to be some life-altering event that triggers emotional pain, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, think about chronic stress, those everyday conflicts that never seem to get resolved, or even major life transitions like moving to a new city or having a baby. Those can all take their toll too.
It's like that saying, death by a thousand cuts. All these little stressors, they can really add up and start to weigh you down.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to a really important point that several sources emphasized, the connection between emotional and physical health.
Yeah.
They're not as separate as we might think.
Oh, yeah. I'm really curious to hear more about this. What kind of physical effects are we talking about here?
Well, one of the articles I was reading, I think it was from the Calm blog, talked about how emotional pain can actually mess with your sleep, like cause insomnia or make it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. And it can affect your digestion too,
Right.
that lead to all sorts of stomach issues. And some people even experience muscle tension or headaches.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that directly connected. Is it because our bodies are trying to tell us something's off emotionally?
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
And there's definitely some communication happening between the mind and body, that's for sure. One study I came across, I can't remember the source now, but they actually found that people dealing with chronic stress are something like 60% more likely to develop heart problems later on.
60%, that's a huge increase. So it's not just a matter of, feeling down or sad. Your physical health is really at stake here.
Exactly. It's serious stuff.
So I guess the big question is, what are some red flags we should be looking out for? How do we know if emotional pain is becoming, something we need to address more seriously?
Well, a lot of the sources mention some common warning signs, like if you're feeling sad or angry or hopeless all the time, if you've lost interest in things you used to enjoy, or if your sleep or appetite has changed drastically.
So it's not just about how we feel, but also how those feelings are affecting our behavior in our lives.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to remember that getting professional help, it's not a sign of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
It actually takes a lot of strength and self-awareness to recognize when you need support.
Okay, so we've talked about why emotional pain hurts so much and some of the things that can trigger it. But the good news is these sources also offer a ton of advice on how to cope, right?
Yeah.
Both in the short term and the long term.
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum of strategies out there. Everything from those quick fixes like grounding exercises or calling a friend just to vent,
Hmm.
all the way to those more, I guess you could say, in-depth approaches like mindfulness or therapy.
Right. I even saw one source that talked about humor, the idea of faking it till you make it, as a way to cope with emotional pain.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. They were basically saying that even if you don't feel like laughing, just engaging with something funny like watching a silly video or something, it can actually start to shift your mood. It's about kind of interrupting those negative thoughts and giving your brain a little break.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would help. Sometimes just watching like a cat video on YouTube is all it takes to lift my spirits a bit.
Exactly. It's about creating that mental space. And speaking of changing your thinking, a lot of these sources highlight the benefits of something called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short.
Oh, yeah, CBT. I've heard a lot about that. One of the things I remember reading about was this technique called reframing negative thoughts. Have you heard of that?
Oh, absolutely. Reframing is super powerful. So instead of thinking, I'm a failure, you might try challenging that thought by saying something like, okay, I made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes, and I can learn from this.
So it's about shifting your perspective, I guess, focusing on the solutions instead of just dwelling on the problem.
Exactly. And CBT is more than just reframing, of course. It also focuses on something called behavioral experiments.
What's that?
Basically, it means trying out new behaviors to challenge those negative beliefs you might have. So instead of just thinking, I'm terrible at public speaking, you might actually try giving a presentation just to see what happens. You might surprise yourself.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Get out of your comfort zone a bit.
Exactly. And beyond CBT, these sources are packed with other practical things you can try. Journaling, doing something creative, yoga, volunteering, even just making sure you get enough sleep can make a huge difference.
Wow, there really is something for everyone. It's all about finding what works best for you, right?
Absolutely. It's like building your own personalized toolkit for dealing with emotional pain. And that's what we'll be diving into next. We'll explore some of those specific coping mechanisms and how you can start putting together your own toolkit for emotional well-being.
It's really amazing, actually, how many different approaches there are to coping with emotional pain. It's like everyone's got their own unique set of tools.
Yeah, it's like building a personalized toolkit, right? You got to figure out what works for you. But something that's just as important as having the right tools, it's knowing which tools not to
Oh,
use.
that's interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, several of these sources talked about the need to be aware of what they called unhealthy coping mechanisms. Those behaviors that might give you temporary relief, but in the long run, they just make things worse.
Okay, yeah, I think I see what you mean. Things like turning to drugs or alcohol to numb the pain, or overeating, or even self-harm, stuff like that.
Exactly. It's like one of the sources, Eden's Counseling, I think it was, they described it as putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it might cover up the problem for a little bit, but it's not actually fixing anything.
Right, it's just a temporary
And
fix.
it can actually lead to this vicious cycle where you get that temporary relief, but then the pain comes back even stronger, and you end up relying on those unhealthy behaviors even more.
So how do we break free from those patterns? A lot of the sources seem to emphasize early intervention.
Yeah, definitely. Recognizing those patterns early on and getting professional help, that's key, especially when it comes to things like substance abuse. It's really tough to break those habits on your own.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about when it comes to supporting loved ones who are going through emotional pain? I mean, that can feel just as challenging as dealing with our own struggles, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough to know how to help sometimes, but these sources did have some good advice for navigating that.
Oh, like what?
Well, first and foremost, just being a good listener, really hearing what the other person is going through without judgment and having patience, because everyone heals at their own pace.
Mm-hmm. One article I read, it was from Savita, it really stuck with me. They said the most important thing is to validate the person's feelings rather than trying to jump in and offer solutions or fix the situation.
Oh, that's so true. Sometimes people just need to feel heard and understood.
Exactly. Just acknowledging their pain and letting them know you're there for them can make a world of difference.
Yeah, it's about creating that safe space for them to just be themselves. to express what they're going through. And, it's important to remember that everyone grieves and heals differently.
Hmm.
There's no right or wrong way to experience emotional pain.
It's like we all have our own unique journey through those challenges, right? It's fascinating how, even though emotional pain is something we all experience, it can manifest so differently for each of us.
Absolutely. And that actually leads to a really interesting point that a few of these sources brought up this idea that emotional pain, even though it's incredibly difficult to go through, it can actually be a catalyst for growth.
Wait, really? That seems kind of counterintuitive.
I know, right? But it's not about seeking out pain or anything like that or,
Hmm.
romanticizing suffering.
Hmm.
It's more about recognizing that even in those dark moments, there's potential for transformation.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, the idea is that by confronting those difficult emotions head on, instead of trying to avoid them, we can actually gain a deeper understanding of ourselves. And it can even help us clarify our values, figure out what really matters to us.
So it's like those challenges force us to take a step back and reevaluate things.
Exactly. And it can lead to some pretty amazing things. The sources were full of stories about people who had gone through really tough times, but they came out stronger on the other side. They used those experiences to fuel their creativity, their compassion, their advocacy for others.
There's that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I know it's not always that simple, but I can see how going through hard times can build resilience. It's like you come out on the other side with a greater appreciation for life.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not about the absence of pain, right? It's about learning how to navigate it, how to learn from it. And these sources, they're full of stories of people who've done just that. They've transformed their pain into something meaningful.
That's so inspiring. One story that really moved me was about this woman who lost her child in a car accident. And instead of letting that grief consume her, she actually channeled that pain into starting a foundation to support other families who are going through the same thing.
Wow, that's incredible.
It's a powerful reminder that even the deepest sorrow can be a source of hope and healing.
It really speaks to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. You know, we have this amazing ability to choose how we respond to those difficult moments in life. And sometimes that choice can lead to profound growth, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us.
You know, it's really amazing to hear how people have taken something as difficult as emotional pain and actually used it as like fuel for positive change. It really does seem like we have a choice in how we respond to these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react. And that choice, I think, that's where the power lies.
So, where do we go from here? I mean, we've talked about a lot the science behind emotional pain, all the different things that can cause it, how it impacts our bodies, and even, that idea that it can actually lead to growth. But what does all this mean for the person out there listening, the person who's actually going through these struggles right now? What's the takeaway?
Well, I think the good news is they've got a lot more knowledge now than they did before. They understand emotional pain better, right?
Mm-hmm.
They know what it is. They know why it hurts so much.
Yeah.
And they know all sorts of different ways to cope. So it's like we've given them a map, a way to navigate this really tough terrain.
Okay, a map. But a map's only useful if you actually use it, right?
Exactly. The next step is to take action. And it doesn't have to be anything huge. Even just picking one strategy that resonates with them and trying it out.
Yeah.
Maybe spending 5 minutes a day doing mindfulness or calling up a friend to talk things through. Little things can make a big difference.
Yeah, I like that. Small steps, build those healthy habits. It's a journey, not a sprint.
Totally. And it's a journey they don't have to do alone.
Mm.
All these sources, they talk about all sorts of resources and support systems that are out there to help people going through these challenges.
It's about connecting with others, realizing you're not the only one going through this.
For sure. And, going back to that idea of pain leading to growth, I remember one source said something really interesting. They said that instead of feeling emotional pain, maybe we could try seeing it as an opportunity to become stronger, more resilient.
Wow, that's a really powerful way to look at it. Instead of something to be avoided, it's a chance to actually grow.
Exactly.
Right.
It's like pain's not the enemy. It's what we do with it that matters.
Right.
And, at the end of the day, the message I really hope people take away from this is that there's always hope.
Mm-hmm.
We all have the strength to get through tough times, even when it doesn't feel like it. And with the right tools and the right support, we can come out on the other side even stronger than before.
So to our listener out there, whoever you are, wherever you are, if you're struggling with emotional pain, just remember you're not alone.
And you have more power than you realize. You get to choose how you respond to these challenges. You have the strength to heal and to grow.
That's a great place to end it, I think. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep believing in yourself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.